Welcome back to the sim. In this one, we're hopping in with the Cessna 414 here on the ramp at CYOW. Now we're going to cover the new configuration we've just done. Now this focuses strictly on the Alpha yoke and hopefully gives you some ideas what you can do with other yokes and devices at the same time. So let's go ahead, jump inside and have a look. One of the important things to keep in mind is I have my buttons and switches all set up in a specific way. We've shown this in many other videos, but we will look at it for everyone. So under settings, global, you're going to see that I've set up a button, one as simple push button, two as a push button, simple, push, whole bunch of simples. Switches, we've disabled the lower side of all the other buttons and switches. And then we have all of the buttons that make up the Magneto switch, all those set to switch. So have a look through all that, make sure they match. That way when you download the snippet, it will match perfectly and just work. All right, so remember one of the key features that I love in this is the Lego block. By selecting the Lego block, then anything that you do pressing a button on the joysticks will have the buttons and the UI move for it. So button number one, which is the push to talk left side on the yoke. This guy we've got set up to press and release. So on the press, that event, let's just slide it over. That event is going to press VJoy 101 because that's what I've got mapped in vPilot so that I get a push to talk being held. On the release of the button, we are releasing the VJoy. Now, you can map this directly in vPilot for yourself. I have more than one yoke and joystick, therefore I use the VJoy button as a means to have one in vPilot, but any of my yokes or joysticks can be used. Button number two. So that's the button on the top of the horn. This is kind of where usually a autopilot disconnect button is. So we went ahead and we have set that up for autopilot disconnect. The way I run the autopilot disconnect, and we'll show all the buttons and switches working at the end of the video, but the way I run that is on a short press, we are going to set AP_mode, which is an LVAR to 0. So when you are assigning an action, that would have been add action, change data value, and then I went looking for AP_mode and I found it. Of course, because we're sitting in the 414. Don't forget, you won't find LVARs if you're not actively in it or it isn't something that's been found before. So there we go. That's going to set a 0. Now on a long press, so if I hold it for 1 second and let go, that is going to do both disconnect the autopilot and disable the yaw damper. So I can use this on short final to pop both the autopilot and the yaw damper out and get full rudder authority. Button number 3. So you're going to find that button number 3 is over here, the white button. And we've mapped this to the transponder IDENT toggle. So that way in vPilot, if we're on VATSIM and we get asked to IDENT, we can just press that button and it will IDENT. And you're going to see that in the transponder later on. Button number 4. So that is the red button up here on the top. And that mapped nicely to where the push to set your sync of your pitch and attitude for roll and pitch mode. So with the button pressed, we will set the LVAR of the flight director switch to a 1. So you'll see it physically go down and be held. On the release, it will set 0, so the switch will pop up. Also, we added on the release to send the event of sync flight director pitch. So this is one of those examples you're going to see with a few things where we may have to move an LVAR to make things in the cockpit change on the 414 while still having to send some kind of event or set some kind of variable. Now, we could have just sent the flight director sync pitch. However, had we done that, we won't see or hear the button click. Button number 5, our trim switch on the left side. This is a split trim. And so to deal with a split trim, what we've done is we only allow this event to be sent, and it can be held and repeated. So if you hold it down, it'll send it a lot. This will only happen if button 7, which is the right side split trim, is also a 1. So that way you can't have runaway trim. And that's kind of the intended purpose of how these work. 6, which is the down event, that will be button trim down. But again, that won't fire. Both have to, because button 8 is now going to have to be active as well. Moving on to 9 and 10, we're using those. So that's 9 and 10 up here. So that's your rudder trim. But again, both have to be selected for the rudder trim to actually fire. Button 13. So 13 is where we come to the actual switches. And so here, this is the alternator switch. And what we've done is 14 is at the bottom. Since we have this in a switch mode, we don't need the bottom. We have a switch on event and a switch off as opposed to a button press event. So in the switched on state, this again is how we're manipulating the LVARs and the simulation AVARs. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the left alternator LVAR to a 1, so the switch will go up. And we're going to set the right LVAR to a 1 so that the right alternator also goes up, since we only have one alternator switch. We're going to pause for 100 milliseconds so that those LVARs set. Then what we're doing is we're going to take the AVAR, the General Engine Master Alternator 1, and we're going to set it to match the alternator left LVAR. So that's why we wanted that 100 milliseconds. So once we've set it, waits 100 milliseconds, it'll register, this will pick it up, and that way we will keep the master alternators in sync. And we've done the exact same thing for alternator number 2. So we're doing both those on the same switch. In the switch off, we are going to set zeros, wait for 100 milliseconds, and then we're going to set the values based on those in the same way. Just copy it over. Yes, we could have also set the value to a 1 or a 0. I wanted to show this as a way in which you can have variables read from other variables. Finally, in the switched on, we're also going to make sure to set the master bar to 1. So it turns out you can move these things without setting the bar from SimConnect. If I flip the switches in the cockpit, it did take care of the bar on its own. So this is our way of ensuring that on a switched on event, if the bar isn't already set to 1 and up out of our way, that it will be set for us. Button 15 is the master battery. And so with the master battery, we need to set the electrical master battery LVAR to a 1, which moves the switch. We're going to delay for 100 milliseconds, and now we're going to set bus connection on 6 to the same value as the LVAR. So it's a 1, it will set this bus connection on, which will connect the battery bus inside of the AVARs. The off works the exact same way, where we link those two together. And again, because usually the battery is the first thing we switch on, we want it so that when we switch that battery on, it will also flip the bar on for us. So that's what we're doing on our 3 steps that we've set up for that, the battery switch. And again, you'll notice the even numbers are missing because we turned those off since they are buttons on the bottom. We only need the switch action. Moving on, number 17. So the Avionics Switch actually follows along with the standard Avionics events. So we are able to send Avionics 1 on, send Avionics 1 off. Those are the standard events, and the switch follows along. Moving on to 19, Avionics Bus 2. I decided to use this to trigger our boots. And so this is our DeIce Boots. Didn't know what else to do with it, so I used it for the DeIce Boots. When it's switched on, it is going to move the momentary DeIce surface LVAR to 2. That is going to automatically switch itself back to a 1 on its own. And we need to set the structural DeIce memory LVAR to a 1, and that will set accordingly that it was engaged. And then after it times out, it does its own thing and goes away. When we switch it off, it is actually going to send the reset command. So it'll reset it, and then it'll go back to the middle position. So that's how we set it up to deal with that 3-position switch, and works really well since both sides are momentary switches anyway. 21 comes down here to the beacon light. And so with the beacon light, we've gone ahead, since there was no dedicated beacon, that's part of the strobe and anti-collision. What we've done instead is we've used this to map for our de-icing. So we've got our electrical de-icing. So we've got our prop de-ice, and it's going to send the wing light set because we need the wing light set to move that switch. We switch it off, it sets 1s and 0s accordingly. So what we're going to have happen here is we're going to first check that the switch is a 0 before we send it when we set it into the on position. When we set it into the off position, we're going to go ahead and check that it is a 1 before sending the toggle event. And that ensures that no matter what happens with the cockpit switch, it gets everything back in sync for you. 23, here we're going to be doing our landing light. And so the landing light is a 3-position switch. I decided to commit to 2 positions, the full up and the full down or retracted. So when I switch this on, I'm going to set the momentary light switch landing 1 to a 2. We're going to delay execution for 100 milliseconds. I'll open that up. We're going to delay execution for 100 milliseconds. And we're going to set the landing light motor LVAR to 100. And so by doing that, it is going to move the landing light motor, and that will progress. It will come out. We'll see it move, which is pretty awesome. We don't have to move it in steps. And then we go ahead and we turn the light on. Now, if you want to wait a longer duration before the light comes on, go ahead and here, throw in another pause. So you'd add an event, you'd go to pause, which is a delay. You could add some time so that it will come out before the light coming on. I didn't really care that the light comes on as it's already moving. For the switched off position, we're going to set the landing light to a 0. We're going to wait 100 milliseconds. We're going to hit the landing light motor to 0 so it now starts retracting, and we will turn off the landing light. So that's what we've done for the up and the down positions of the landing light. Coming over to the taxi light, number 25. Again, taxi lights, we were able to use the set taxi light to a 1 and set taxi light to a 0. So just setting those LVARs, and it takes care of the taxi light for us. Next, we come on to 27. 27 is the nav light, and we use set light nav to 1. This is a standard AVAR. This did not require us using an LVAR. The standard SimConnect AVAR was more than enough. Next up, we've got our strobe light. And so with the strobe light, you set the strobe to a 1 or to a 0. That moves the switch, and it takes care of everything as well. So that one didn't require us doing anything with LVARs. For 31 through 35, that comes over to this side, and it's the Magneto switch. So with the 31, we're going to go ahead and we're going to set the Magneto bar when switched on. So that's when it comes into this position. That's going to set the Magneto bar to a 0. When we switch it off, it is going to set the Magneto bar to a 1. So we'll see the Magneto bar move up. And we added that when it's switched on, we're going to set the Magneto 1 set and Magneto 2 set. We're going to set those to a value of 0. So it also ensures that the magnetos were both turned off. 32, which is the R position. This is going to set both Magneto 1 and Magneto 2 to position 1. So this will turn on the right mags. When we go to 33, this is going to set it to position 2, which just turns on the left mags and turns off the right mags. When we go to 34, we're going to set Magneto 1 and 2 to a value of 3, which will set all 4 switches to the on position. So that's both on both sets of engines. Then for starting, we did something a little bit different. We're going to go ahead and when switched off, it's going to set both starters, starter 1 and starter 2, the LVARs, to 0. But for switching on, we went ahead and we borrowed switch 12, which is the lower switch, pushed that way. So when we hold this and set our Magneto into the start position, it's going to set the LVAR 201. And that'll hold it down just like holding the button if we click it with a mouse, and that will start engine number 1. When we're done, we go ahead and we move the Magneto back to both. That will release the starter. Then we can hold button 11, which is that switch, but pushing towards the left engine. And so when we hold it that way and we crank our starter, now it's going to kick off starter number 1's LVAR. And again, same concept. When we return it back to 0, so we turn that switch back to both, we don't have to worry. All of the LVARs will be set. I map all of my axes still inside of the sim just because I find I need to add a whole bunch of response curve. Yes, there are response curves in SPAD.neXt. Yes, you can come in and edit these. I find it takes a lot of precision because you have to move it on both sides. Would be nice to have a quick axis configuration similar to what's in Microsoft Flight Sim, or at least have the option to mirror. So whatever you're doing on one side would automatically mirror to the other. For those that are looking for really detailed control of their axis, though, do understand this far exceeds what you can do in Microsoft Flight Sim, because you can now create all kinds of points and you can edit and manipulate each one of those points and those curves independent of one another. Obviously, you wouldn't do it this way, but you get the idea that you can build all kinds of axis points. Hat switch, same thing. Just because of the way the camera system works inside of it, I find it's easier just to leave this on the default hat inside of Microsoft Flight Sim. So there you go. That's it. That covers all of the things. Let's go ahead, jump in, and step through the starting procedure based on what we've set up. So we want to go ahead and we want to get that battery on. So battery switch comes on. Everything is great. We're going to leave the alternators off. We can see we're already getting a low battery because we've been sitting here. So let's try to get this started as quick as we can. So when we move that mag switch, you see the mags go up, go down, all go up. So if I turn the starter right now, nothing happens. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold right, and we are going to hold down that LVAR. There it goes. And again, I could have let go of this because when I switch it back, that will release the starter. Now we're going to come back across to the other side so we can see that engine. And now we're going to hold this way, put it into the start position again. There we go. And with that, we started both of our engines. So looking back down at the switch panel, and you'll see that we will turn on our generators and the annunciators go out, and now we can also see some current coming across. So that's going to go ahead, and our low battery also went out. Let's go ahead and get our avionics on. So now we got our avionics on, Avionics Switch, just for the fun of it. There you can see the boots click. You can see the annunciator is on. Our boots would have fired, so those would have been good. And then again, when we turn it off, it's going to hit the reset for us and take care of the rest of the timers, and those will go out when they're done. Coming down here to what was the beacon light, as you can see, that's going to turn on all 3 of our DeIce switches. So we get our windshield on, our prop, and our prop light. Coming over to the landing light. So we've got our landing light that will go up, it'll go down. So if we hop outside, so you saw they came on because obviously we don't have that delay, but we could have added a longer delay to wait for them to come out to retract before turning on. But I don't really bother me, so I go ahead and I leave those on. Turn off the landing light, it'll turn them off, and then it'll go ahead and retract them for us while we're at it. We've got our taxi light, we've got our nav lights, and then of course we've got our strobe lights. Moving just this switch, nothing happens to our trim, but if we hold both, we see our trim wheel is trimming. Back down we go. We've got our push to talk on the back like we mentioned, and then right here we have our autopilot. So I go ahead and throw in the autopilot and the yaw damper. So when we hit the white disconnect, we've got our autopilot going off, but our yaw dampener staying on. So if we put it back in with yaw damper and autopilot, but we hold it for a long press, now it fires and disconnects both for us. We've intentionally gone ahead and moved that flight director down so that you can see this is our pitch attitude. And so if we press the red button, which is the same thing as pressing this, you'll even see it click. So we'll press it to hold, goes down and it's held, nothing happens. On the release, it will grab your pitch and it will set the flight director to match that pitch attitude. And then looking over at our transponder, if we go ahead and hit the white button, we get our IDENT. All right, guys, while we were sitting on the ramp doing all this, it looks like the rain has started here in Ottawa, so we better get taken off and get on our way down to Toronto. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and come along with us next time. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.